So, welcome to Sam and Schneider's Midnight Musings.
So, the Sam and Schneider's Midnight Musings is a new format that we're experimenting with right now, and what you hear might not be what we do every week, or it might be if it turns out to be popular. But what we're going to do is we're going to discuss a popular topic in the world of entertainment, usually in the more nerdy side of entertainment, although we might get mainstream occasionally. And we're just going to discuss our feelings about it, pros and cons, kind of just generally look at figures and things like that. So,
all right.
Yeah.
And we'll just hope it works out with you guys. So today's topic we were looking to discuss was the relatively recent news of Spider-Man's inclusion in the Marvel Cinematic Universe.
For those of you who don't know, the movie rights to Spider-Man have been owned by Sony for many, many years. Marvel themselves don't actually own the rights to all their characters to be used in movies. X-Men and Fantastic Four are owned by Fox, and Spider-Man is owned by Sony, which means that crossovers between the Avengers and Spider-Man were not possible until very recently, when Marvel and Sony decided to make a deal so that Spider-Man could be used in Marvel movies, and then Marvel characters could be used in Sony movies. Sony still retains the rights to the characters, but it's now kind of a joint thing.
So important things to hash out about the deal. Sony is not going to be making any money off of movies out of Marvel's movies that include Spider-Man. And Marvel will not be making any money off of any solo Spider-Man films, even if it includes Marvel characters.
That was the most surprising thing about the deal for me. I actually expected there to be revenue both ways, or at least Sony making revenue from Spider-Man's inclusion in Marvel. I at least expected that to be the case if this deal were ever struck.
All right. That kind of came as a surprise to me, but I personally think that it actually makes a certain sense in a way. Sony really does need this deal to go through. Marvel didn't need the deal to go through at all. They did not need the additional revenue. Of course, they might like it. So from a financial standpoint, it didn't surprise me too terribly much that Marvel wouldn't be trying to make money off of Sony in this case, or Spider-Man individual films. And it does make sense from a standpoint of allowing the studios to continue to remain separate and have largely separate business dealings. This deal appears to be mostly just aimed in a creative direction.
Which is interesting to me. I actually, I'll start with my initial reactions to this news. To be perfectly honest, never expected this to happen, at least not anytime soon. I know that there were talks between Marvel and Sony to include Spider-Man in the upcoming Captain America Civil War. But from what I heard before, those talks broke down. And the role that Spider-Man was going to play in the Civil War movie was replaced by Black Panther, who Marvel actually owns the rights to. And so I kind of assumed that, all right, that's that. You know, Marvel wasn't able to use that character, but they went with another honestly great character instead. And I expected that to be the end of it. I expected for Sony to continue making Spider-Man movies, whether they were going to continue with the Andrew Garfield series or reboot it a third time. But no, I was surprised pleasantly that to see this deal go through. Zach, what were your initial reactions to it?
I actually wasn't all that surprised. Admittedly, you know, it's extremely rare and unheard of to have a film studio so eager to cooperate with another one, especially regarding controls of a character. This is something that studios tend to hold on to very dearly. However, Sony and Marvel had been this was not the first time they had discussed attempting to share the character, and creators had already decided to try and stick little bits of references to each other in another, and Sony and Marvel overall have had a fairly good relationship recently, and with the continued talks of Spider-Man, if there'd only been the one talk where they'd attempted to integrate Spider-Man into the MCU, it would have come as a surprise to me. However, they've been having multiple talks over the course of years to try and integrate Spider-Man, and so in addition to Sony's recent financial problems, it came not that much of a shock to me that this deal to me was something that was definitely going to happen. It was just a matter of when. And so while I was pleasantly surprised to find out that it had happened so soon. It was going to happen much sooner than later.
I know that when they were when Marvel was doing post-production of the Avengers, they had actually reached a deal to include the Oscorp building as part of the New York skyline, and the only reason that it was not put in there was because they couldn't finish the rendering in time, which was really interesting. Like, I was surprised to find out that, but I'd always heard, smarter people than myself say that that didn't actually mean anything, and that would have really just been an Easter egg, if nothing else. But it does, not in light of the recent deal made, it does kind of, it makes certain things make more sense now. That maybe they actually were trying to build towards this, but they're having a hard time coming up with an agreement until now.
Or at the very least, it was an indication that the two studios were more than willing to start working with each other on
exactly.
areas.
And I've always found it interesting that Sony and Marvel are on such good terms, and this is a slightly different thing, but that Marvel and Fox are on such bad terms. And I've always tried to I've never really been certain as to why that's the case. Like, do you have any thoughts on that?
Not entirely certain myself. I'm guessing that it's probably more in the corporate area of things because Marvel and Fox, they tend to, their approach to these properties that they own with Marvel, fairly respectful of the original source material. So from a creative standpoint, I don't really see it as coming from there. So I assume,
especially with X-Men. I know the Fantastic Four movies, not as much, but even so. But go ahead.
True. But so most of this, I assume, was a corporate problems over the years. But no, both Marvel and Fox have definitely shown a severe dislike of each other. Marvel even going so far as to cut down on their certain number of X-Men comics, make it harder to read those in recent years. And that appears to have been largely a move just despite Fox. Foolish move, but in any case, both those companies very much have not gone along with each other, but it's nice to see that Marvel is still perfectly capable of talking with and being on good terms with other studios that own their companies, up to and including the studio that owns Man-Thing. I'm just joking. No one cares about Man-Thing.
I think Man-Thing is owned by Universal, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah.
But I think that's literally the only. And I might be wrong about that. There's actually no. Universal owns Namor and no other characters. I just realized that Man-Thing might have gotten back to Marvel, but I can check that.
Hopefully, there was like a sci-fi original movie featuring it that went about how you'd expect a sci-fi original movie to go.
Well, it's also Man-Thing, which is not a character anyone really cares about anyway. So
No, nobody cares about Man-Thing.
No offense to any listeners for whom Man-Thing is their favorite Marvel character.
Indeed.
That's totally your choice.
Yeah, that's perfectly valid judgment, not one that I share or understand in any way, but that's how you roll.
Let's talk about potential drawbacks to this deal. I know that my biggest thing is just the general idea of Spider-Man being rebooted a third time, because it seems like Andrew Garfield will not be returning for this. I really like Andrew Garfield as Spider-Man as an actor, and all things being equal, I would actually like to see him return. I know that the second Amazing Spider-Man movie was disappointing to many people, myself included. I didn't completely hate the movie, but I had a lot of problems with it. And I quite liked the first Amazing Spider-Man movie, and Andrew Garfield was one of the better parts of both of those. And to not see him return is to me kind of a disappointment.
Understandably. Andrew Garfield did have a good presence as Spider-Man himself. The actor did a good job with the role. One of the much-loved parts of the Amazing Spider-Man series was, of course, Andrew Garfield and Emma Stone's chemistry in those, although that, of course, would already have been over, considering how Amazing Spider-Man 2 went. Although that was a decent plot point in that film, although...
I actually thought that was well done. I think they could have kept it for the third movie, but I thought it was well done.
Indeed. So a bit premature, but well handled, and that's one of the few parts of Amazing Spider-Man 2 that was well handled. Anyhow, but that's a whole other discussion. In any case, I do think that version of the character, whatever the problems were, could have had room for traction, room to continue on in his own vein. And I do think it's, even if you were not to include that version of the character, but keep Andrew Garfield on as the new version of Spider-Man, I think that could have been a move that could go successfully. But I can also understand Marvel wanting to have someone who perhaps, in their eyes, fit with their cinematic universe a little better. Although I personally think that Andrew Garfield could fit well into that universe.
I actually think he would have good chemistry with the other established actors in the MCU. How do you feel about the fact that, in general, that series and those plot lines are not going to be continued? Because I know, again, the second movie was disappointing, but I think it could have been interesting to have seen where that version of the character and that version of the series could have gone after that. What are your thoughts on that?
Well, my personal thoughts are that, for the most part, that's not such a great loss. I was actually, one of my favorite parts of the Amazing Spider-Man series was the indication, just slightly in the background, that Peter Parker becoming Spider-Man was actually just a part, an important but relatively small part of a much larger concept going on behind the scenes, something that had involved him and his parents, and I thought that was an interesting conspiracy-esque storyline that hadn't really been done with Spider-Man before, or at least not on film. But all in all, I can understand the want to drop that, and frankly, I was not too terribly enthused with most of the other things that the Spider-Man universe had been leading up to at that point. In all honesty, Secret Six, or Sinister Six. Secret Six is a completely different thing. Sinister Six just did not seem to me to be a interesting thing. It could have been, but the build-up to it was hackneyed and frankly was actually lowering the quality. That was handled in a very inorganic way. And that, so that particular plotline, as it was currently, did not seem to me to be handled well or interesting to lead up to. And the other major plotline, of course, the Gwen Stacy and Peter Parker romance, of course, ended in Amazing Spider-Man 2, so...
But I thought that the way they ended it put Peter Parker's character in a really interesting place that I would have liked to have seen where they went with in the third movie. Personally, like that was kind of how I felt about that.
True.
This is something that I just found out today, which I was very surprised to. According to Sony, the Sinister Six movie is not actually canceled, but it is being regarded as postponed, quote unquote. I still would be surprised if it actually came out at this point, but apparently there's still a chance that Sinister Six might happen. My thoughts on Sinister Six on the Sinister Six movie that Sony was planning on making was always that it was a terrible idea that looked like it had some really good creative people behind it. It was to be directed by Drew Goddard, who was the director of Cabin in the Woods, and who also wrote the screenplays for Cloverfield, which I loved, and World War Z, which I wasn't as much of a fan of, but I know a lot of people did enjoy it. So like he's a guy who I have a lot of respect for creatively, and because I think he was writing and directing the Sinister Six movie, that was kind of the reason that I had some hope for it. And then, and I was talking to you about this before, the actual cast that they have so far for Sinister Six is actually a really good cast that was mostly mishandled in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but are still all very, very good, strong actors. Dane DeHaan, who plays Harry Osborn, who I actually thought was one of the better parts of The Amazing Spider-Man 2, although his transformation into the Green Goblin was not well handled, but I otherwise still liked his character and the way he played him. You have Jamie Foxx as Electro, who, again, I didn't like him before he became Electro, but once he became Electro, I thought was a good character, and Jamie Foxx is a world-class actor.
Oh, yes.
He's excellent. And then one of my favorite actors, Paul Giamatti, actually one of my all-time favorites, who gave a horrible performance in The Amazing Spider-Man 2, but in the hands of a better writer and director, maybe could actually be a good Rhino. What was my thing about that? And I know the rest of the cast was not announced because that movie was kind of... it never really got its feet off the ground, and at this point, if it's made, I doubt they'll bring the same cast into it.
Probably not.
But it's just interesting. And then, looking at financially speaking, if Sinister Six were marketed right, well, let me say this. If Sinister Six were to come out after a Suicide Squad movie, if the Suicide Squad movie were really successful, I could actually see Sinister Six doing well in that world.
Right. And for listeners who are unaware, the rival company to Marvel, DC, owned by Warner Brothers, has started production on a film entitled Suicide Squad, which, seemingly similar to Sinister Six, has been billed as a film wherein several characters who are either straight-up supervillains or otherwise anti-heroes are forced to, and as the title implies, threat of death, go on a mission or several missions for the government. And that, again, as Sam would put it, that would really build up a lot of good idea for Sinister Six. Might have them give an idea of... It might seem as though it's unoriginal, although, truth be told, I believe Sinister Six was actually that idea was being planned long before Suicide Squad, but at this point will not be done anywhere by the time Suicide Squad is done. My personal opinion of Sinister Six is that they probably should just go ahead and cut ties to the Amazing Spider-Man universe and most of those concepts before making a Sinister Six movie, if only because all of the build-up so far, all of the planning that seems to have gone into it thus far. I agree that Drew Goddard really is an excellent person, and I really do agree that the actors attached are fantastic. But the characters attached to it so far have been very, very poorly handled, and their introduction is, frankly, it's just not good at all. So they've had a poor introduction to audiences. They've had a poor introduction as characters themselves, so at the moment they very much lack depth and lack a lot of subtlety. Even Electro, who, while fairly enjoyable once he did actually become Electro, still suffers from carrying over elements of personality and the relative lack of subtlety that he has as Max in that film. So personally, I think that if they do continue with Sinister Six, which they should only do very carefully, if at all, then they're going to pretty much have to restart the concept from General and have a new basic creative idea for the thing in general. Keep Drew Goddard on as director, though.
Oh, I agree. A lot of people are under the misconception that The Amazing Spider-Man 2 did not perform well in theaters. I looked up these figures last night. The Amazing Spider-Man 2 worldwide made $700 million on a $200 million budget.
True.
That actually is a pretty good... Even when you take into account marketing costs and the cut that the movie theaters take, that's a pretty big profit margin. The question is, if they were to go ahead with The Amazing Spider-Man 3, and I do think that they... If they were to continue that series, they should do Amazing Spider-Man 3 before Sinister Six.
Oh, certainly.
But if they were to continue on with that, the question is, would the poor reception of the second movie have a negative effect on the box office for a third movie?
Personally, I think that the second movie was very critically stunned. Like, critics were not huge fans of it. In general, while audiences did enjoy go see it, and while it was in some respects an enjoyable film, it is certainly not a film that is going to have it's not going to put a lot of butts in seats if there are other relatively similar films coming out in and around the same time as third Amazing Spider-Man movie. And that's just because word of mouth and previous knowledge of how the last movie went would have people be slightly wary of it. I think it would actually do fairly well, especially internationally, but not anywhere near as well as Amazing Spider-Man 2 did. And potentially not as well as a film if they already have a new version of Spider-Man prepared with a new creative team attached.
If I would play devil's advocate for that point, just very briefly, Transformers Dark of the Moon came off of Transformers Revenge of the Fallen, which was a horrible, horrible movie. And Dark of the Moon is one of the highest grossing movies of all time. So that's just one example of, while I agree with you in general, that's one counterpoint that you could keep in mind going forward.
True. So, yeah, that's a fair point. And that is a good one concerning Sony. However, Sony does seem to... It seems as though part of the reason it wants to have the deal with Marvel is partially so they have the financial gain of having more Marvel characters, but I do genuinely think Sony wants to do better critically as well. Of course, they're a company, they're out to try and make money, and they don't seem to be in any massive danger of making money off of Spider-Man films, but I do think they want to try and make just better films in general.
I think that's a fair point. And looking at Mark Webb, who directed the first two Amazing Spider-Man movies, he's not Michael Bay. He is actually really... I have a lot of respect for Mark Webb, actually. He is interested in making good movies, although I'm not sure whether he's going to be attached to the new Spider-Man franchise that they're starring now. So let's shift gears a little bit and talk a little more about the positives again. What do you think are the major benefits both to Marvel and to Sony of the joint deal?
Well, a major positive to Sony is, of course, they get to attach themselves to the MCU. So, for Sony's standpoint, they are finally able to introduce Marvel characters into Spider-Man. When they get to make a new version of Spider-Man, they are not forced to come up with a new blank slate. They have an established universe within to set him and his roles. So there's you can have a little bit of story with that. You can have a little bit more fun with what Spider-Man is able to do. Of course, when you think of being inserted in the MCU, you think of superhero crossovers, but even just on a more civilian level, there are a fantastic number of excellent characters in the MCU and plenty of excellent New York-based characters, particularly the entirety of Stark Tower. So the MCU is rich and already has a New York rich with history. So including Spider-Man as a hero, especially a hero in the wake of the entire alien invasion from the Avengers. So that, in some ways, you could have Spider-Man be a character that introduced as a response to that crisis. Of course, his origins wouldn't be too terribly different, but it might be nice to see that as being a way that he's stepping up in that. And so you already have building blocks to build from when introducing Spider-Man and his stories in the world, so they don't have to come up with everything from scratch, which I know I've said about 3 dozen times. But so from Sony's standpoint, that's fantastically useful. Marvel's standpoint, they get one of the most iconic heroes of all time. Definitely one of the 3 most iconic heroes in the world is Spider-Man.
Yeah, it goes Superman, Batman, Spider-Man, honestly, would be the top 3.
And character-wise, most of the other Avengers are either government-based or very heavily tied to, Thor is literally a godlike alien, Captain America is a symbol of the country, and even Bruce Banner as the Hulk is very much ties to military threats and is part of a much larger world and is a much more larger than life character. And Spider-Man, although still larger than life, is perhaps the first real street level everyman type superhero in the MCU at this point. So whereas everyone else is fantastic in their own rights, Spider-Man is a character who is fantastic in costume and a smart but otherwise normal person out of the costume, and that's a new dynamic for the MCU, so it should be a fun one that they get to play with.
The everyman appeal of Peter Parker has always been one of my favorite parts of the character. Spider-Man is my favorite superhero of all time, personally. And it's interesting, they are introducing another superhero very, very soon that a lot of people aren't thinking about, who could have very interesting crossovers with Spider-Man, and that's Daredevil. A lot of people forget about the fact that the upcoming there's an upcoming Netflix series based on Marvel Comics Daredevil, which by all accounts is a part of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Like it is being integrated into it. And crossovers between Spider-Man and Daredevil have actually been very popular in the comics and very interesting, because the two characters, they feel like they belong to very similar worlds. They're both New York-based superheroes. They both are a kind of... They have the same level of believability in terms of just their existence, but they have very different personalities. And seeing them play off of each other is something that could be really interesting to see happen on screen.
Right. And, of course, there are a bevy of Marvel shows that currently exist and Marvel shows that are coming up. So that is a good point that I didn't think of, that Spider-Man, in addition to being able to cross over in the movies, might have an interesting effect on current and up-and-coming Marvel shows.
Yeah, and the other two main series that are currently on television are Marvel's Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., which would probably be the most affected by it, and then Agent Carter, which probably would not be affected since it's a prequel that takes place years before. Right. But
they might have Spider-Man peripheral characters.
Yeah, very possibly. J. Jonah Jameson Sr., maybe.
Right. And on a side note, I'll be immensely disappointed if they can't get J.K. Simmons as J. Jonah Jameson.
He's the only one who can play that role. Let's just play a kind of a fun hypothetical. Like, who would you like to see play the new Spider-Man?
Well, personally, there's a lot of talk, and talk that I pretty much agree with, that Donald Glover would be an excellent choice. At this point, he may be a little old for the role, but if you have, say, 20-something Spider-Man as opposed to teenage high school-era Spider-Man, then Donald Glover would be, in my opinion, a good choice. For a younger one, it would be very difficult to say, especially since my number one choice would be Grant Gustin, but he's already been snatched up by DC. So
that's true. Grant Gustin is playing the Flash on this CW series. For me, I agree with Donald Glover. I think he would be a very, very good Peter Parker. And I've heard him talked about for Miles Morales, who's the ultimate version of Spider-Man. But personally, I actually would like to see him play Peter Parker.
Right.
Now, as far as a more teenage Spider-Man, one of the big rumored names that's apparently being considered is Logan Lerman, who I would actually really like to see play Peter Parker. Logan Lerman is the title character in the Percy Jackson movies. That's mainly what he's known for. He's also been in several other movies, like he was in Perks of Being a Wallflower. He was the lead in. Really great young actor. I believe 22-ish, so he's still in the age that he could play a teenager. And he has a very young look too. I know another name that was being talked about briefly was the lead actor in The Maze Runner, which I have not seen, and I don't remember the actor's name right now, so I don't really have an opinion on him yet, just not being familiar with the guy's work.
Right.
But I know that those were the two rumored names for the people who were being considered for it.
Right.
And I'm completely on board with Logan Lerman. I think he would actually make a very good Peter Parker.
I agree. Logan Lerman, he has the proper quality for Peter Parker. He's young, spry, and certain he can pull off the sarcasm just fine. But as for the Maze Runner rumor, I've only seen a little bit of it. just from the trailers and promotional material, I'd actually say that particular lead actor may actually come off as too young for Peter Parker in some ways.
Oh, really?
Like, that was just my personal opinion, is that he seems... I don't know the actor's actual age, but to me he came across as being 13 or 14-ish in the trailer. And you could have a Spider-Man that young, but that seems a very strange and very young age range for the character of Spider-Man.
In the original comics, Peter Parker becomes Spider-Man at the age of 15. Most adaptations age him up a year or two from that when he becomes Spider-Man. But I know that canonically speaking, he was 15 when he first became Spider-Man. And also keep in mind, time between the actual filming of Maze Runner and the filming of the new Spider-Man. But yeah, I could also... They couldn't... This is not someone they could actually get, but I could see Aaron Taylor Johnson play Peter Parker possibly, but he's already playing Quicksilver in Avengers Age of Ultron, so that's
true.
That's impossible at this point.
And with the current Marvel and Fox dislike of each other, I find it very unlikely that Fox would be willing to let go of one of their actors who was playing a character in their series to go ahead and be part of the Marvel-Sony deal.
Well, Aaron Taylor Johnson is playing the character in Avengers.
Oh, right. Sorry.
No, that's okay. No, Evan Peters actually would also be a good choice, but he plays Quicksilver in X-Men Days of Future Past, which technically might be more possible. You have the Chris Evans who played the Human Torch and then later played Captain America, but it's still unlikely.
True. And if I had to guess, I'd say that given Evan Peters' very well-received reception in Days of Future Past, that it seems much more likely that Fox would be attempting to keep him on and keep the character on for future X-Men movies.
Quicksilver is confirmed for X-Men Apocalypse, which is coming out, I think, in 2 years.
As I figured.
So, do we have any concluding thoughts about the Sony Marvel deal?
Overall, I think it's a good move. It's not really a potentially worrying move. I know Marvel had a lot of plans for their own movies, and had set up a schedule for that. But overall, I think that Spider-Man is a character that can integrate well into the MCU as it is, and I think it would do right by Sony and Marvel to have the character. And overall, I think it's a good move for both companies, and definitely for viewers.
I agree that this is a good move, and I agree that the viewers are the ones who really are winning in this deal. There are many people who've been wanting to see Spider-Man in the Marvel Cinematic Universe since it started. I have very small reservations about it, but overall I think it's a good move, and I'm very happy that this is happening. Just the idea that we could see Spider-Man in an Avengers movie is just it's amazing to me. I never thought that we'd be able to see it, or even have Iron Man pop up in a Spider-Man movie, maybe for a cameo. I mean, there's just hypotheticals, obviously, but overall, as a viewer and as a fan of Marvel Comics, I'm really happy about it.
All right. So, yeah, that's pretty much what we can all agree on, is that this is definitely something that is going to be excellent for any and all moviegoers who enjoy both companies.
So that will conclude our inaugural episode of Sam and Schneider's Midnight Musings. Again, as we go forward, when we see how this is received, we may make some changes to the format. And we're considering this, again, a companion series to our comedy show, Sam and Schneider, The Midnight Hour, which, if you are not listening to that, then what is wrong with you?
So much shame be brought upon your head. No, we're just kidding. But, so thank you for listening to this podcast. No, it's not exactly comedy-wise, but that's not the intent. So yeah, we'd be glad to don't really know the topic that we will have next time. The name, topic, format are all pending. Yep, it's all pending at the moment. Pending, love that word. Anyhow, so thank you for listening. I'm Zach Schneider.
And I'm Sam Wilson, and stay classy.
Yeah, stay classy.